If you recall, we are still in the first bracha of the three brachot surrounding the Shema, and I'm hoping we can get to the end of it today. But it's an exciting one. We've been building up to this point. So if you recall, we started with our opening bracha, Yotzer Or Vorei Choshech Oseh Shalom Vorei Et Hakol. God creates light and fashions darkness. He makes peace and he creates everything. And then we went on first to a prose paragraph talking about God making it daytime and nighttime on a daily basis, and that being miraculous. And then we went into a poetic description of the cosmos, at least as it was understood in ancient times, with the earth at the center and various celestial bodies circling it, and all those celestial bodies representing the heavenly host, and in their constant and daily, let's say, circumambulations of the earth, they are singing a great universal song to God's magnificence. And then we added a little some Shabbat additions, which has expansions on those themes, and then even the idea that God is kind of wrapping up the seventh day in the Sabbath, and the seventh day itself is now singing a song to the Sabbath day. And now that brings us to this final glorious conclusion. So just as a reminder, the very last sentence on both Shabbat and weekdays, and this is from what we looked at last week, is this: Titbarach Moshienu al Shevach Maaseyadecha Ve'al Me'ore Or She'asita Yifarucha Selah. And what we're going to be looking at today is identical for Shabbat and weekdays. If you are looking in the Siddur Sim Shalom for weekdays, that's the burgundy or gray covered volume, it'll be on, this sentence is the very last sentence on page 30. And if you are in the Shabbat and Festivals version, it'll be the very last, not the last sentence, but it'll be on page 109. It'll be the last sentence in either the second paragraph or the last sentence on the page. It appears twice. So you can take your pick. The words are the same either way. So let's just look at this, and all right. Titbarach, be blessed. Moshienu, our deliverer, for the excellent work of your hands and for the glowing lights that you created, they will glorify you. And then, if you turn the page, we continue. And notice that the next word, the next sentence begins with the exact same word. Titbarach, right? May you be blessed. So these are connecting, right? So that's meant to connect this next prayer to the prayer that we just finished. So let's see what we've got here. Titbarach Tsurenu Malkeinu V'Goalenu Borei Kedoshim. Be blessed our rock, our king, and our redeemer, who creates holy beings. Your name be blessed forever, our king, who forms servants, and whose servants, all of them, stand at the height of the world and proclaim in awe together in one voice the words of the living God and King of the universe. All of them are beloved, all of them are pure, all of them are mighty, and all of them perform in reverence and awe the will of their Maker. And all of them open their mouths in holiness and purity, in poetry and in song, and bless and praise and glorify and adore and sanctify and enthrone. We're laying it on thick as we always do. What's the theme here? What are we talking about? Who are we describing?
Angels.
All right, so it would seem to be the angels. And are these the same angels that we've been talking about? Probably, right? And we've been talking about the various celestial bodies as being those angels. And so now we're kind of not really introducing any new things, but But what are we describing? Now we're kind of shifting in terms of the way that they're proclaiming God's glory. Now we're saying they're actually opening their mouth. They're singing, right? And so I think we have a much more anthropomorphic description of angels now in this paragraph. All right, I'm going to now restructure a little bit. Now in our Siddurim, so this is on weekday, it's on page 31. It's on 110 in the Shabbat and festivals. There's actually some patterns here. Now this is prose, but I want to point out some of the patterns here. So let's look first of all. We have "Be blessed our rock, our king and our redeemer, who creates holy beings." So the word for holy beings right here is Kedushim. Right? So we're describing these angels as being Kedoshim. Yishtabach, may your name be blessed forever, our king who forms servants. Right? And now we're describing the servants. Whose servants, all of them stand at the height of the world. That's Barum Olam. Rum is like a ram is high, something that's high. So Barum Olam, the height of the world. I saw another translation, above the world. Not sure exactly how to express that in English. And now they're proclaiming in awe with one voice, right, the words of the living God and King of the universe. Now look at the next. We have a description of these angels themselves, but let's look at the Hebrew and let's see what we can notice. Kulam ahuvim, kulam berurim, kulam giborim, v'kulam osim be'ema v'ira ratzon konam. Do you notice anything in that passage?
Aleph, Bet, Gimel.
Aleph, Bet, Gimel. Right? Look at the first letters of each of these words. Right? So again, we've seen lots of alphabetical lists of things before, which suggest that it's about more about the form than the specific content of the words. So ahuvim, so that's like ohev is to love. Barurim, barur is like clear or pure maybe. Giborim is mighty. It turns out that in some ancient manuscripts of Piyutim, they finish the Aleph Bet with this, right? So some ancient Greek Greek Piyutim from Greece have the complete acrostic poem here. But in our Siddur, we've only excerpted the first three of them, right? And that's not too uncommon actually, where perhaps only a part of a piyut survived, maybe somebody only remembered a part of it, or maybe they only knew about a little bit of it, or maybe somebody intentionally decided, you know what, I don't want services to last too long. I'm just going to put the first three, and people can extrapolate the rest. I don't know. It's hard to know why we only get fragments like this. The high holidays coming up, there are actually our Piyutim in the Machzor where it's only a fragment that survived. In fact, there's one at Ne'ilah, the very ending service of Yom Kippur, where I think it's there's 3 sentences, each fragments of a lost piyut, and that's all. But those fragments made their way into the Machzor, and so they became part of the liturgy as kind of lost piyutim.
Rabbi, can you point in the Hebrew where these 3 words are?
All right, do you see my arrow?
Yeah.
Right
Okay.
so
I'm trying to translate it to my book.
Yeah, ahuvim, berurim, giborim.
Ugh, I can't see it in
Right
the
after the box in Sim Shalom.
Okay, yes. So in the Sim Shalom, it's right by the box.
After or before?
After.
Yeah, it's the word immediately after the box. Now,
Kulam.
if you look at an older
Here we go.
Siddur, they don't. The box doesn't appear here, right? So, is anybody using the old Siddur Sim Shalom for Shabbat and weekdays? Here, I'm gonna go grab mine off the shelf.
Because I know the box is a Sim Shalom invention, very contemporary.
But it's not just Sim Shalom. Lots of Siddurim do that, and that box is there to cue the person leading services when they should come in with
Yeah.
chanting, right? So these are
Right.
prayers that are typically recited silently, and then the Shaliach Tzibur, the person leading, will kind of come in periodically. Sometimes it's at the end of a prayer, or sometimes there are certain prayers that are done out loud, and that box is a cue for that. So the interesting thing here is that in most traditional Siddurim, the box would appear at V'chulam Porchim, the last paragraph that I have here, right? And so in English, this is a pretty precise translation. And all of them open their mouths in holiness and purity and poetry and in song and bless and praise and glorify and endure and sanctify and enthrone. So the problem with beginning right there is that we've begun in the middle of a sentence. Right? The sentence really begins with Kulam Ahuvim up above. All of them are beloved, all of them pure, almighty, all of them perform in reverence and awe the will of their maker, and all of them open their mouths in holiness and purity, etc. Right? So that's really, it's kind of a single sentence. Prayer book Hebrew is not concerned with run-on sentences the way we might be concerned with in English, right? What's the subject of this sentence is all of them, right? All of the angels. And this first part is describing what they do, and then this one is describing them actually doing it. So it's really, and so that's why in the newer versions of the conservative movement's prayer books, they put the box a little bit earlier at the beginning of the sentence. Sometimes, at least in Sinai, when you hear somebody leading services, they will start doing it out loud from V'chulam Porchim. Even though the box is right here in our Siddur, and it's because when they learned how to lead services, they learned probably from this Siddur. And so that's kind of locked in their minds, and kind of the melody in their head for leading services starts in at V'chulam Porchim, right here. Okay, what are you expecting to happen next?
People will enter.
All right, something's going to enter. Oh yeah,
People.
we're talking about angels. So where are the people?
I know. Well, they'll come next on the hierarchy.
Okay, well let's see. This sentence is also missing a subject, an object. Right? So a sentence has a subject, that's whoever is doing the action. We have a verb, the action itself, and then if it's a more full sentence, it has an object, which is the thing that is the object of that verb, right?
Right.
So who is it, or what is it that they are doing all of these things to? We don't have that yet. So look in your Siddur, and what do you see at the end of that paragraph after Umam Lichim in terms of punctuation?
Big gap.
None.
Nothing, right? So this is interesting because in most traditional Siddurim, until very, very recently, you might have a period there, right? You always have a paragraph, a new paragraph, which is strange because it's in the middle of a sentence. And it really needs to connect with the thing that comes next. But we're going to take a little diversion. While we're talking about angels, we need to maybe clarify which angels it is that we're talking about. So we're going to look at Isaiah first. Isaiah is one of the three great prophets, of the major prophets. Major because they wrote a lot. There are also minor prophets, and they're minor not necessarily because they weren't important in their day, but because they didn't write as much. So Isaiah is 66 chapters long. He is a prophet. He is a priest and scribe as well. And so this is Isaiah's famous throne room vision of God. And even though it appears in chapter 6, this is the calling scene for Isaiah. Right? Every prophet has a moment when they are called to be the prophet, right? So most famous, think Moses at the burning bush, right? Before the burning bush, he's just a regular old shepherd, and then all of a sudden he encounters an angel within a bush that is burning but not being consumed, and it turns out to be God. So and that's Moses' big calling scene. This is Isaiah's, and we're also going to look at Ezekiel's. We're not going to look at Moses's because it's not really part of this. It's not part of the Siddur here, but Isaiah and Ezekiel's is. So this is how Isaiah's begins. Strange that it doesn't occur in chapter 1 of Isaiah, but that's okay. In the year that King Uzziah died, I beheld my Lord seated on a high and lofty throne. Right? That's Al Kisei Ram Vinisa. Some of this language might be familiar from other prayers. And the skirts of his robe filled the temple. Already, we've got Isaiah. He's in the temple. He's maybe even in the Holy of Holies. And he sees an image of God. God sitting on top of on a throne, right? This is the first temple. So what do we know about the first temple and the throne of God and the ark? So the ark is really is described as God's footstool. So it's kind of the bottom of the throne. And somehow God's presence appears in the space above the kruvim, the cherubs that are on top of the ark. So here's Isaiah. He's in the throne room. He has an image. And then he says, and the skirts of his robe filled the temple. Right? So what are the skirts of God's robe?
Would that be the smoke of the incense or something?
Right. So there's this strange confluence of themes when having these kind of prophetic visions of God. So think about Mount Sinai. You've got God's voice being in the center as being fire, but it's surrounded by smoke and clouds. And you might get some flashes, but really what you're seeing and encountering is the smoke and clouds around it. It's described as smoke and clouds. It's also described as the kavod, right? The glory of God. And here in Isaiah's vision, he's describing it as the skirts of God's robe. Right? Whenever the priest would go in and offer things in the temple, it's always accompanied by an incense offering. So if you can imagine, there's this incense smoke that's filling the space, and that incense, it's incense, but it's also, you can imagine it as the skirts of God's robe, the very bottom of the thing that's surrounding God, which is the kavod. The temple, and specifically the Holy of Holies, is this nexus where heaven and earth come together. And so it's simultaneously the kind of let's say the physical world, the lower world, as well as the upper world in that space. And so when the high priest goes in there and can encounter God, he's kind of simultaneously in two worlds. And so that's what Isaiah is experiencing here, right? He's being transported into the heavenly throne room while he is on earth in the earthly temple. And so he's going to describe what he sees. Seraphim umdim mima'alo. So seraphim, so seraphs, stood in attendance on him, really kind of in front of him. So what is a seraph? A seraph is a kind of angel here. The seraphim are also the, let's say, serpents or the snakes that attack the Israelites in the wilderness. They are fiery. So there's this kind of overlapping themes in a seraph, right? So it's a snake, it's an angel, some sort of heavenly being. It's got associations with fire. When Moses makes a staff to hold up and to cure the Israelites when they're beset by a plague of poisonous snakes, it's in the shape of a seraph, right? So some sort of divine, maybe serpent being. So how does Isaiah describe this? Sheish knafayim le'echad. 6 wings to each one, right? When the Hebrew repeats, it's not necessarily that we need to translate it into English. With the repetition, it's a way of maybe emphasizing something. So our translation says each of them had 6 wings. What do you do with 6 wings? With 2 he covered his face. With two, he covered his legs, and with two, he would fly. Right? One of the challenges that the prophet has is how do you communicate this transcendent vision that you've had in words that can make any sense whatsoever to anybody else? Right? It's not possible. And so prophetic descriptions invariably don't make sense to us because we didn't have that experience. Even for the prophet himself, right? That's something you experience in the moment. And afterwards, he's got to make sense of what it all means. And so the act of writing it down is his attempt to make sense on it, which is why we're left with this description, which we can maybe kind of picture it, but not really, right? And that's going to be even more of an issue when we get to Ezekiel. All right, so we've got these six-winged seraphim flying around, and what are they doing? And this should sound familiar. V'kara zeh el zeh ve'amar kadosh 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 Adonai tzvaot maloch al haaretz kvodo. So v'kara zeh el zeh, and he called out this one to this one, right? In other words, one to the other. What are they calling out? Holy, 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 the Lord of hosts. Malochol haaretz kevodo. We're going to get later into the problems with translating that, but for now we'll just say his presence fills all the earth. All right. So,
Rabbi?
yes.
So if these seraphim are snake-like, why do they have legs to cover with two of the wings?
Right.
And then I do know that we stand with our legs together, I guess, to mimic that. But
Maybe.
Maybe. But why? So why does it say that they have legs if they
So
are
the
snakish?
text is not describing them as serpents, right? What I'm saying is that the word seraph has multiple meanings, and it's possible that there is, I mean, we've all, the idea of some sort of reptilian mythological being. Like we're familiar with this, dragons, all of the other things that exist in so many different cultures. So if there's some sort of idea of some sort of mythological being that is, maybe in the backstory behind the word seraph. Here, it's clear that the seraphim are some sort of angel, and all we know about them is that they've got these six wings, and four of them are covering themselves, and they're flying with the other two. That's all we
Rabbi,
can say for sure. Yes.
what is the host, Lord of hosts?
Adonai Tzvaot. So what are the hosts? We've talked about the hosts before.
I don't remember.
Kind of the assembled angels,
Yeah,
right?
it's the assembly. It's the divine assembly. Here
Okay.
Isaiah is describing the courtroom, right? And God's not alone in the courtroom. He's got these seraphim that are there with him. So Adonai Tzvaot, the Lord of hosts, and maybe I don't know if the seraphim are the extent of the hosts. That's all that Isaiah mentions here, but they're certainly part of it. We saw earlier that the hosts is a reference perhaps to the celestial bodies, all the stars and the planets and things like that. Or it's the myriads and myriads of angels that do God's bidding.
Do we know when Isaiah lived?
Yeah, right here. In the year that King Uzziah died. Right? We have a date.
Okay.
we have a date. So I think that's 8th century. 8th century. The problem with the book of Isaiah, though, is that it seems to represent at least 3 different time periods. And so scholars have identified, a first Isaiah, second Isaiah, and third Isaiah. This is first Isaiah. Right?
Do we know what it is?
He's the one who is mentioned by name. The other Isaiahs don't actually use the word Isaiah, right? So, but at some point they get attached to this Isaiah literature.
So was this written down?
Yeah, at some point. Yeah, I mean, probably. Yeah, this is ancient. I mean, there's Isaiah scrolls in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but I mean, this probably goes back to First Temple times as a document.
And we have no idea what's causing him to behold this, whether he's dreaming, whether he's in the temple and seeing something, hallucinating, who knows?
I saw just last week a strange reference that was looking at the recipe for the incense. And noting one of the ingredients is called kane bosem, which kane is reeds, and bosem is maybe like fragrant. Like,
Oh, I thought it was related to cannabis.
well, you went right there, Sherry. Kane bosem. And so there's a suggestion that this is actually the earliest reference to the word cannabis, and that maybe there was some sort of psychotropic drug in the.
Yeah. Well, that I was wondering about the incense. Like, what is the meaning of that? You know, how holy is that? What does that conjure up?
Yeah,
In
well,
as far
first of all,
as
it's part of the holy offerings, and we're not allowed to make it. We're not allowed to make it by recipe for for non-sacred purposes, and for sacred purposes, like I mean specifically temple purposes, and for temple purposes, we've got to make it precise, or it's bad news, right? So this is a very holy offering. In practical sense, it may have been there to mask the smell of all of the animal sacrifices. Yeah. But I think all religions use some sort of incense as part of their.
Well, I know, like Russian, when I've been to Russian funerals, the entire time they're, emitting incense, and it's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church is heavy in incense too.
Yeah, and that's from the the biblical precedent that we're talking about here.
So we have the unseen censer swung by seraphim whose footballs tinkled on the tufted floor.
And what?
The raven, Poe.
All right.
He references a censer, which is an incense burner, and seraphim in like the same line.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's straight out of Isaiah, right? So let's continue. So he hears them calling out to each other, and then what happened? The doorposts would shake at the sound of the one who called, and the house kept filling with smoke. Right. So you can imagine the incense, right? But what is he hearing? They're calling to each other. It seems like they're taking turns. The seraphim calling to each other so that they can listen. Although they're also speaking in one voice. So, I cried, "Woe is me! I'm lost." That sounds about right. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my own eyes have beheld the King, Lord of hosts. Right? He is impure. Right? How can he survive this experience? Right?
Then and he uses the word "oi."
Oi. He does. Yeah. Oily. Then one of the seraphs flew over to me with a live coal, which he had taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. He touched it, right? There's our incense, right? He touched it to my lips and declared, "Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt shall depart and your sin be purged away." And I heard the voice of my Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I. Send me," right? Hineni, shalacheni. Right? Powerful scene. And then the vision continues where he actually gets the message from God. That's not important for our for the Siddur. What is important is that we have this first-hand description of God and the angels proclaiming the holiness of God. Right? And so that is going to become very important in our Siddurim. In the daily, say on a weekday service, we end up reciting this verse, which we call the Kedushah, right? The proclamation of holiness. It gets recited 3 separate times, right? This is going to be the first of the three declarations of the Kedushah. But I think it's really important to understand where it comes from. So this is the Isaiah piece.
So
why do we not do the Kedushah on virtually on Shabbat?
So let me back up. So we at Sinai we've not been doing this. Well, actually, we do.
We say kadosh, 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 but we don't.
The one in the Amidah, which is part of the repetition of the Amidah, requires a minyan in order to recite, because it's considered to be a proclamation of the holiness of God, a public proclamation of the holiness of God's name, and that requires a minyan.
But we usually have that on Shabbat.
But the problem is that it's not a minyan where we're actually in each other's presence. And the fact of the echo is a very clear reminder
I see.
of us not being each other's presence. There's some other kind of halachic issues. Now, I'll just say this is what we're doing at Sinai. There are other shuls that are considering a virtual minyan to be a minyan for those purposes. We are using it for the mourner's kaddish, and the reason we're doing so is essentially that the mourner's kaddish has a different place in the Siddur and really a different purpose psychologically and even liturgically. And there are arguments to be made, which we are making, to be a bit more lenient in terms of saying that with a virtual minyan.
So Rabbi, but why aren't the other two, like even this one, how come we don't stand up and have the same reverence for it in this passage and in the other one as in the Kedushah?
Yeah, so in this passage, and we're gonna get to that, it actually gets a name, and the name is Kedushah de Yeshiva, which means the Kedushah of sitting. Okay? So it's the Kedushah that is recited while sitting.
So why?
Oh, why? We'll get to that. Right now, we're just looking at the source material. Now let's look at Ezekiel. Ezekiel is prophesizing. He's a bit later than Isaiah. He's prophesizing from Babylonia, from exile. So he says, in the 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, when I was in the community of exiles, he says it explicitly, by the Chebar Canal, the heavens opened, and I saw visions of God. Interesting. He is seeing this vision not at the nexus of heaven and earth, not in Jerusalem, not in Israel, but in exile. So that's pretty remarkable, right? And what is he seeing? I'm convinced that what he's seeing is actually the exact same thing that Isaiah saw, the exact same thing that Elijah saw when he fled to Mount Sinai. It's the same thing that Moses was talking to up on the top of Mount Sinai. But the way that they describe it is all different, because each prophet, they're seeing something completely transcendent, and now they've got to somehow describe it with words, and so their descriptions end up being completely different from one another.
What's the Chebar Canal? I mean, is it just this little small icky canal, or is it something
know.
majestic?
Oh, it's probably something like the Tigris or the Euphrates or something.
Okay.
All right, so here it was. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin. The word of the Lord came to the priest Ezekiel, son of Buzi, by the Chebar Canal in the land of the Chaldeans. That's Babylonia. And the hand of the Lord came upon him there. I looked, and lo, a stormy wind came sweeping out of the north, a huge cloud and flashing fire, surrounded by a radiance. And in the center of it, in the center of the fire, a gleam as of amber, right? Now, to me, this sounds a little bit like Mount Sinai, right? You've got, some fire in the middle and surrounded by clouds, right? It's stormy, right? Wind. There's so many similarities with other prophetic descriptions. Pretty remarkable. In the center of it were also the figures of 4 creatures, and this were their appearance. The word for creatures is chayot, right? He says umitocha demut arba chayot, right? And from within it, the image of 4 creatures. Chayot. We've already encountered this word chayot. If you remember when we were looking at El Adon last week, in the last line of El Adon, the last 4 words, Seraphim ve'ofanim ve'chayot HaKodesh, right? The seraphs, the ofanim, which we'll get to in a second, and the chayot HaKodesh, the holy beings. And that's what Ezekiel has just mentioned here, these beings. All right, then it goes on. He starts describing these creatures. He describes their faces. They got 4 different faces, etc. They got some wings. And then we get to this passage in verse 15. By the way, I would encourage you, later on this afternoon, perhaps, read the whole chapter. It's pretty wild, and nobody knows what he's talking about. And this gave rise to the entire branch of mysticism called Maseh Merkava, the works of the chariots. We mentioned that last week as being part of the exploration of the work of the chariot is looking at the astronomy and the astrology of the heavenly bodies. But here's his description. As I gazed on the creatures, I saw one wheel on the ground next to each of the 4-faced creatures. Right? So he says, Ve'ereh chayot, there's our same word again. These words appear lots of times in this passage. I looked at the chayot, right? Vehine ofan, And here was one ophan, right? An ophan's a wheel. So let's see how it continues. As for the appearance and structure of the wheels, they gleamed like beryl. All four had the same form. The appearance and structure of each was as of two wheels cutting through each other. And when they moved, each could move in the direction of any of its four quarters. They did not veer when they moved. Their rims were tall and frightening, for the rims of all four were covered all over with eyes. And when the creatures moved forward, the wheels moved at their sides. And when the creatures were born above the earth, the wheels were born too. Wherever the Spirit impelled them to go, they went. Wherever the Spirit impelled them, and the wheels were born alongside them, for the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. When those moved, these moved. And when those stood still, these stood still. And when those were born above the earth, the wheels were born alongside them, for the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels. Ezekiel's a little verbose. What does he talk? Could you draw a picture of this?
I can't imagine.
Can't imagine.
The eyes and the wheels. That's really bizarre.
What is he talking about? Yeah. So, these wheels, these ophanim, it seems that in Ezekiel, they're just wheels, right? They're part of the moving mechanism of these angels, these four chayot. And that's how he describes. He doesn't describe them as independent beings. The spirit, or this kind of animating spirit of the angels, is contained within the wheels also. And the wheels, they're either part of the angels or part of the vehicle that the angels are on. Not clear at all. But as the ideas develop and a whole kind of belief system evolves around this, the wheels themselves become angels. So it's not in the text, but in rabbinic texts, the ophanim are themselves actually angels, and they're a class of angel. And so we're going to see that in this reflected in the Siddur. But these are the source materials here. Now we got one more.
These ophanim don't seem to operate according to normal laws of physics either.
It was an anti-gravity machine.
Yeah.
Rabbi Josh?
Yes.
In the 1980s, 1990s, there was this person, Eric von Daniken, that wrote a book, The Chariots of Gods.
Mm-hmm.
And he relates this paragraph to extraterrestrials.
Yeah, that's been suggested. Yeah, he had an alien visitation, which frankly sounds perfectly reasonable. So yeah, there's other descriptions where it's describing like flashing electricity almost. All right. Then we're gonna jump ahead to chapter 3 of Ezekiel. All right. Another vision, a continuation of this vision. He said to me, "Mortal, eat what is offered you. Eat this scroll and go speak to the house of Israel." This is God speaking to Ezekiel, right? This is his inauguration scene, right? So I opened my mouth and he gave me this scroll to eat. As he said to me, "Mortal, feed your stomach and fill your belly with this scroll that I give you." I ate it and it tasted as sweet as honey to me. Then he said to me, "Mortal, listen with your ears and receive into your mind all the words that I speak to you. Go to your people, the exile community, and speak to them. Say to them, 'Thus says the Lord God,' whether they listen or not," right? That's the fate of the prophet, right? You're going to give the message, but the people are never going to listen to you. "Then a spirit carried me away, and behind me I heard a great roaring sound. Blessed is the presence of the Lord in his place, with the sound of the wings of the creatures beating against one another and the sound of the wheels beside them," a great roaring sound, right? So this is probably part of this same vision that we started describing earlier. No, we're already in chapter 3, right? So Ezekiel, he needed an editor maybe. But I'm going to read the Hebrew. "Vatisaini ruach," right? Spirit lifted me up, really. "Ve'eshma acharai," and I heard behind me, "Kol ra'ash gadol," a sound, a great noise. And what is it? "Baruch kevod Adonai mimakomo." Right, that should be familiar, right? This is the second part of the Kedushah declaration. The first one was from Isaiah, Kadosh, 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 and now we get Baruch kevod Adonai mimakomo. And then V'kol kanfei chayot, right? So it's the sound of the wings of the chayot. Mashikot isha el achota, literally kissing a woman to her sister. Right? Isha el achota.
Mashik is not yeah. Mashik is not necessarily kissing.
Yeah.
Mashik is going in parallel.
Going what?
Mashik is also going in parallel. The two wings are parallel one to the other.
Right. So that's what they're beating again. This is how he's describing the flapping wings, right? The flapping wings, and mashik chayot is, I guess, a feminine word. Mashikot is feminine, and so we have isha el achota, woman to her sister. The kol ha'ofanim, and the sound of the ofanim, right? The wheels before them. Or maybe, as the rabbis understand it, the ofanim aren't the wheels. Maybe they're another kind of angel that's there. The kol ra'ash gadol, and the sound of a great noise. So this is a hard passage to translate. Baruch, we know what that word is, like blessed or praised. Kevod, right? That's the glory. Kavod Adonai, the glory of God. But remember, the glory, as these prophets are experiencing it, is maybe it's the smoke or the clouds that are surrounding God, or it's the thing that is making it impossible to really see clearly the essence of God. It's kind of getting in the way. It makes the vision of God somewhat opaque. So that's the Kavod Adonai. And also, and then in Isaiah's vision, we seem to have some overlap between the kavod and the incense in the temple. And then mimekomo, from his place, or in his place. What does that even mean, right? Blessed is the glory of God from its place, from his place. So maybe that we've got, let's say the essence of God is from heaven, from the heavenly throne room, and it's sending down some sort of divine energy, divine blessing into the earth that is manifested as the kavod of God. We'll see.
So
hang on to that question as we get to the Kedushah in a little bit. Siddur, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, with the multiple meanings of kavod, with it being that, I took from what you said that kavod is that which obscures our view of God, but it's also his holiness, or so it's hard concept to understand.
Yes.
Or is it that of God which we don't understand that is holy and beyond us?
I mean,
because it's obscured from our understanding.
Yeah, so it's something that it flows from God, but obscures.
Obscures or is obscured?
But it's holy.
Uh-huh.
As well, right? It's the hem of God's robes.
Yeah, I have some.
God is a king. A king has royal robes, and it's the very bottom hem of it. That's the kavod, as Isaiah describes it.
Yeah. What I try to see is the angels are moving. This is what the purpose to go from one place to another. Therefore, they have the wheel, they have the wings, and all kind of moving element. But God is not moving. He's a location. That means God is not moving. Is in one place all the time, while the angel, which is messenger, are the ones that equipped with wheels or wings or sometimes legs, so they can move around.
Yeah.
I think that's a very celestial view, where you have the center, God is in the center, his place is the center, and the angels and the wheels, particularly that spinning of the wheels, kind of the spinning of atoms, the spinning of outer space.
No, they're going to Earth. They're for wheels, so they can go down to Earth.
Yeah.
He's
just describing them as wheels. I mean, that's what if we translated it as round things?
Yeah,
but it says
round spheres.
Yeah.
When I see it as the part that's in his place, I see it from like a physics perspective of, like he might be in another dimension, but he never moves. He's there, we just can't see him because he's in a different dimension, and everything else moves relative to him because he's kind of everywhere.
Right.
But
So what is Ezekiel actually able to describe? He can describe the angels. He can't actually describe God. He hears a tremendous sound, right?
Yeah.
Kol ra'ash gadol, kol ra'ash gadol. He repeats it, right? A really, really loud noise, right? Baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo. These are words, right? So this is how he, the prophet, is interpreting the noise that he has heard. Right? Think about when the Israelites experience God at Mount Sinai, right? They hear a tremendous noise and they freak out and they say, Moses, you go and you tell us what God said. And that's what the prophet does. The prophet hears the thing that nobody else can hear and understand, but the prophet can translate it into something that people can understand. And we see
nowadays you can compare that to a CT scan. When you go into a CT scan and it goes around and around and you hear that loud noise.
Right.
But the prophets couldn't do that back then.
Well, the radiologist, that's the prophet, right? Who can read the CT scan and know.
I'll call my radiologist a prophet.
Yeah, they should. All right, let's go on. All right, now we are back. Just remind we already saw this slide. This is the prayer leading up. We had our description of these servants. All right, these servants who are standing and they're proclaiming something to God. And these are really wonderful servants, right? They're all beloved, A through Z. They open their mouths, and what do they all do? Okay, who are they going to praise? Now we've got a continuation. Et Shem Ha'el HaMelech HaGadol HaGibor VaNorah Kadosh Hu. This is a continuation of the sentence. And even though in our Siddurim it's presented as the beginning of a new paragraph, it's not. It's the same sentence, right? So what are they praising? The name of God, the King, the Great One, the Mighty One, and the Awesome One. Holy is He. And just as an aside, I've not bothered to gender neutral the translations. I'm trying to translate it as hyper literally as possible. So just take that. We can interpret everything as in whatever metaphors we want. Okay, so now that's the object of the sentence. The chulam mekabelim alehem, all of them accept for themselves ol malchut shemayim zemizav, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven from one another, right? So they're all accepting to be servants of God, right? They're going to follow God's authority, and they give permission one to the other to sanctify their creator. That's a strange concept. They need permission for this? Anyway, that's what it says.
And the permission is from one to the other, not from God.
Yeah, no, the angels, they're talking to each other.
Yeah, so they give each other permission, which is weird.
And how are they doing it? We get with calm spirit, with clear speech, and with holy melody. And we're going to come back to this phrase because here you're going to run into different versions of this in different Siddurim. So we'll kind of skip that for now. But what do they say? Kulam ke'echad onim ve'omrim b'yirah. All of them as one answer and say in awe. And by the way, we're already quoting Isaiah, right? Isaiah had Kulam ke'echad onim ve'omrim b'yirah. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Malochol Haaretz Kavodo. Right? So we're describing what the angels do. They give permission to each other, and they kind of start this big grand chorus. And this is what they do. They say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The fullness of the whole earth is his glory. And then we go on. V'ha'ofanim, v'chayot HaKodesh, Bara'ash Gadol, Mitnasim L'umat Serafim, L'umatam Mishabchim V'Omrim. And the Ofanim, and the holy Chayot, the holy beings, right? So that's out of Ezekiel. Bara'ash Gadol, with a loud noise. We've seen that expression also. Mitnasim, raise up, L'umat Serafim, towards the Serafim. So we've seen now to have three different categories of angels. The first two are now maybe facing or making a big noise directed towards the Srafim. Le'umatam, before them, Mishabchim v'omrim, they praise and they say, Baruch kevod Adonai mimakomo, blessed is the glory of Adonai from his place. So we've now taken, we've unified the vision of Ezekiel and the vision of Isaiah into this three-part angelic harmony, praising praising God. And which I think is kind of interesting, that if both Ezekiel and Isaiah are essentially experiencing the same thing, which is this encounter with God, but they're taking away from it two different understandings and two different ways of describing that experience. The Siddur has then blended together both of those descriptions into a single narrative that is describing the way that the angels praise God. And this is referred to as the Kedushah, the yeshiva, the sitting holiness. Why? Because we're sitting when we do it. And I think the reason that we're doing it is because we're not the ones who are proclaiming God holy in this. This is not presented in the first person. This is presented in the third person. We're describing the way that the angels do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Later in the Kedushah, we become the angels, right? We take on that role. And so when it's us doing it, then we need to be standing. And so that's the Kedushah Da'amida, the Kedushah of standing.
So, Rabbi, there's the parts that are from Ezekiel and Isaiah, but all of the glue in between that bring these two concepts together are written by somebody, and it's like, how do they know that it's okay for them to have their words be the words that are written that everyone's going to say in a prayer book or in a prayer service?
Well, so probably the first person who wrote these words probably did not intend for these words to be said by every Jew every single day, right? This section is part of a section of the Yotzer that is called the Ofan wheel, right? But really, it's a description of the angels praising God, and there actually are different versions of the Ofan that were written. Lots of them. We found them in the Geniza, so they exist. But just like everything else, at some point, something makes its way. Something gets written down somewhere, and then it gets copied down, and eventually it becomes standard. It becomes the set liturgy, and all of the other versions of the Ofan kind of get left behind and get forgotten. But for various holidays, there are traditions of putting kind of holiday-specific piyutim, of inserting them into various places in service. So you might have other versions that appear. But as you can see, that whoever was the writer or writers who wrote this was drawing heavily on Ezekiel and Isaiah. I mean, they're using some of the same language in the prose that they've put in here, but they've done it in a creative way that fuses these two different prophetic descriptions together.
Rabbi, are the Ophanim a different kind of angel?
Presumably.
Okay.
Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
At Sinai, so first of all, thank you. I had no idea that this is where this came from, and I'm very moved by this whole day. So when we're doing this sitting holiness, are we opening the prayer book and saying it to ourselves? Are we silent?
Okay, so usually what's going on, if you got the prayer book, we've got, this is done in chanting, not in singing. So the leader comes in at the box at Kulam Mahuvim, chants that. So if it's, let's say it's Shabbat. Kulam Mahuvim, Kulam Berurim, Kulam Giborim, Bekulam Osim, Be'emav Yoraratzon Konam. It continues on. When I do it, by the way, I connect this paragraph to the next paragraph because it's the same sentence. So I would do Umevarchim, Umeshabechim, Umefarim, Umaritzim, Umakdishim, Umamlichim, Et Shem Ha'el Melech, Hagadol Hagibor, Vanora Kadoshu. So I make a point of connecting them because it's the same sentence. And the way that we chant should reflect the meaning of what it is that we're saying. Then continuing, V'chulam mekablim alehem, ol malchut shamayim ze mizeh, v'nonim reshut ze lazeh, l'hakdish liyoshvam benachat ruach, b'safa v'rura u'v'nima kedushah, kulam kecharonim ve'omrim be'yira. And then, as you can see, it's in bold. So that the congregation says this all together, right? Kadosh, 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 Adonai tzevaot, melech haaretz kevodo. And the leader continues, Ve'ofanim v'chayot hakodesh. And then what I do when I get to this, bera'ash gadol, with a great noise. So how should I sing this? Loudly.
Loud.
And then the whole congregation comes in. Baruch Yod Adonai Mekomo. So that's how it's typically done at Sinai, and I think that's pretty much the tradition everywhere. I don't know of any melodies
What?
for this.
Why we do it first in the third person and later on get up to doing it in the first person?
What was that, Joan?
Originally,
Yeah.
I mean, early we did it in the third person. We weren't speaking about the holiness. Then you said then we all do it in the first person.
No, so what I'm saying is that in this part of the service, this is a Kedushah, right? This is a description of the angelic proclamation of God's holiness. In this one, we're describing the Kedushah in the third person. We're describing how the angels do it. And because we are not the ones who are actively doing it ourselves, it's seated. We're sitting down. Later on, in the Kedushah of the Amidah, where we're the ones who are proclaiming God's holiness, then we need to be standing.
I have some comments. When say Melokol Haaretz, it means it's three-dimensional. Seraphim, as we learned before, are the upper one, over Hashem. Ophanim is on earth, and Chayot HaKodesh is in between. When they say all of them, that means all the dimensions, lowest to the highest, are all one unity that say Kadosh Kadosh. That means this is basically when you go later to say Melokol Haaretz, that means from the bottom for the Ophanim all the way to Seraphim. Therefore, they all say in harmony. And this is what they say, Melokol Haaretz.
All right, well, we'll see about Melokol Haaretz. Okay, what would... All right. Okay, so we kind of got, I'm not sure why that's here. Okay, let's take a quick look here. I don't know if you can see it's bolded, but the word right here is Kedushah. B'safa v'ra v'nima Kedushah, kulam sorry. B'safa v'ra v'nima Kedushah kulam ke'echad onim v'omrim b'yira. So this is the second paragraph of the page. The last two lines of that paragraph, beginning with B'safa. You are going to find in different Siddurim a slight difference, a difference of one vowel that changes the meaning. And I'm going to...
I'm sorry, what page is that on?
All right, so this is on page, let's say 31 in the weekday Siddur.
The very bottom?
Nope. Second paragraph. The second to last line of that paragraph, where it says B'safa v'rura. All right.
Should be come after that.
All right. So B'safa v'rura uv'ni'ima is how you will see it in a lot of older Siddurim and traditional Siddurim, and probably in Orthodox Siddurim today. And if you were going to translate that, you would say B'safa. Safa is literally. Sorry, we have to back up. Okay, they give permission to each other, l'hagdish liotzram, to sanctify their creator. So how are they sanctifying their creator? Benachat ruach, that's with calm spirit. B'safa, safa is literally lips,
language
or speech, right? Vrura is clear. Ni'ima, maybe pleasant here. B'safa v'rura v'nima, right? So with speech that is clear and pleasant. Kedushah kulam ke'echad onim v'omrim b'yira. Kedushah means holiness as a noun. Holiness, all of them as one, answer and say in awe. Right? This is how you will see it in probably in Orthodox Siddurim. And actually at Sinai, even though it doesn't appear this way in our Siddur, some of people who learned how to daven a while back often say it this way. But look at the bottom. Kedushah. And that's what appears in our Siddur here. And puts the comma in a different place. Right? There's a single vowel difference in the movement of the comma by one word. That's all the change that we've made. But look what it does. lahakdish leotram, so to lift off the mem, to sanctify their creator. And now, benachad ruach, besafav rura, uvinima kedushah. Right? We've got a pattern of 3 expressions about how the angels are going to be proclaiming God's holiness. Nachat ruach is calm spirit. Safav rura is clear speech. And ni'ima kedushah. And ni'ima is a strange word that probably does not mean pleasant, as it appears up here, but probably means melody.
Melody, a tune.
Melody, Kedushah, and holy melody, right? And so you can see we've got noun, adjective, so that the pattern repeats itself 3 times in a row, which is why the Siddur Sim Shalom has corrected it and moved the comma, right? Now, the tendency to make it Kedushah, as in the version on top, is because that's what they're about to, right? They're doing the Kedushah, right? They're doing the proclamation of holiness. And so you can see how someone, especially when you don't have vowels or commas, might pronounce this with an U instead of an O. So, but the version on the bottom is probably the author's intention. Not that the one on top is saying anything heretical or religiously inappropriate, but in terms of the pattern of the text, the one on the bottom makes more sense. Then we have kulam kechad onim v'omrim bira. All of them as one answer and say in awe. Okay. So that's one issue. Now, second issue. This is from Isaiah. Kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. Holy, holy, holy. Why 3 holies?
All the 3 levels. Chayot, Ofanim, and Safim.
Maybe.
Trinity.
Why not 2? Maybe not. Who knows, right?
To,
Isaiah only
to
talks
compete.
about... Isaiah's
To
only
compete with the
Seraphim. He doesn't mention the Chayot or the Ofanim. So for Isaiah, it's just Seraphim. Why 3 holy? I had a professor
To
say
compete
there's probably a
with the
typo
Holy
and there were probably
Trinity.
only 2 holies originally. But anyway, what about the word malo? All right, any Hebrew speakers? Or Oded, you can help. Any
malo
malo. What kind of a word is malo?
The whole volume of the earth is
The
glory.
volume of malo is
The volume of the earth.
It's a
Hello,
noun,
collage. All the volume.
right? Now,
Malay is full.
malay is to fill as a verb or an adjective, right? And that's how you'll often see this translated. Holy, holy, holy is Adonai of hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory. But that would have to be malay chol haaretz kavodo. But that's not what Isaiah says. It's malo chol haaretz kavodo.
It's
So
adjective.
malo
It
is
means
an
the fulfillment of the
It-
whole volume of the earth.
fullness.
It's adjective.
Right? Well, no, malo is the fullness. It's a noun, right? The fullness of the entire earth is his glory, right? So what Isaiah is seeing, remember, Isaiah is in the throne room. He's transported to the heavenly throne room, and it's all the nexus between heaven and earth. But at the same time, it's also a microcosm of everything, of the universe. And so, and what has he seen? He's seen this kavod. He's seen this glory or the smoke or the hem of God's robes. Is God limited to one place? No. What Isaiah is saying is that the fullness of the entire earth is the kavod, right? So this kavod, the hem of God's robes, the glory, is throughout all of creation. That's what Isaiah. That's actually what the pshat of this verse in Isaiah means. So I think about that a lot actually. Whenever I say this verse, is that is God to be found just in one place? No. What the prophet, an early prophet, is saying is that it's everywhere. The entire earth is part of God, or is a reflection of God. And the fact that Ezekiel has his vision outside of the land of Israel, I think, further lends support to that idea. All right, I want to quickly finish our last paragraph. This one I think won't take us too long. This is at the bottom of page 31 or 110. La'el Baruch Ni'imot Yitenu, to the blessed God they shall give songs. We're still describing the angels. To the King, the living and eternal God, they shall recite hymns and proclaim praises, right? We've kind of backed out of these throne room scenes, and we're saying, oh, this is the kind of thing that the angels do all the time, right? They do lots and lots of this kind of stuff. Why? Ki hu levado, he alone. And now we've got a long list of things that God is. He is Poel Gevurot, Oseh Chadashot, Baal Milchamot, right? You can see the pattern. A worker of wonders, a maker of new things, a master of war, a planter of righteousness, a grower of salvation, a creator of healing, awesome in splendor, really literally an awesome one in splendor, a lord of wonders. Right? And then Hamechadesh betuvo b'chol yom tamid maseh v'reshit, who renews in his goodness every day, constantly, the work of creation. We're coming back to how we started, actually, right? This was the theme of the very first paragraph, right? We're not talking about angels anymore. Now we're talking about God creating every day creation anew. Ka'amur, as it says, le'oseh orim gedolim ki le'olam chasdo. This is the great Hallel, Psalm 136, to the maker of great lights, whose mercy is everlasting. And now the final sentence, which makes the dramatic shift. Or chadash al Tzion ta'ir, v'nizkeh chulanu mehera le'oro. Right? A new light upon Zion shine. It's a command, right? Second person, right? You do it. God, we are now speaking directly to God. Shine a new light on Zion. V'nizkeh chulanu mehera le'oro. May we merit, all of us, mehera, soon, le'oro, to its light. Right? And then the final closing bracha, Baruch atah Hashem yotzer hameorot. Praise are you, Adonai, the former or creator of the lights. Right? So we come back to where we started. Right? But this final sentence before the bracha, the Or Chadash line, we've now just, this is the first time we've done this throughout the psalm. This is the first time we've asked for something. Right? We're asking for light. But this is not just any old light. This is the Or HaGanuz, the hidden light, right? So on day one, God says, Vayihi Or, and there is Or, and yet there are no Me'orot yet. There's no heavenly bodies. That doesn't happen till day 4. So what is this light that is being produced without anything in the sky? So this is this light that was then hidden away, and the Midrash says it was hidden when Adam and Eve ate from the fruit. That's when the light was then hidden away and suppressed, and is being saved for the future when it will be brought out again, in the world to come, or in the Messianic age, or however you want. And it's going to be brought out for the righteous. And so we're tying in the daily creation of the lights that we see up in the sky every day, connected it to the angels. God, the angels are praising God, but we're using it as a way finally to say we want some of that light, right? We want some of that hidden divine light that comes directly from God, doesn't have the, let's say, nothing in the way, and that will be able to merit in the world to come. So when we say finally creator of lights, we're referring to more than just the lights in the sky. We're kind of alluding to that light from the first day of creation as well. And that is the end of Yotzer. Took us, like a month to get through it? The next one will be much easier. Much shorter. One day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.
Thank you so much.